Thank you for coming out this evening. The first piece that you heard on the program, I wanted to open with, I'm going to step a little forward so I can see the audience. I wanted to open with music, because that's why we're here. Lecture, recital, but I wanted to open with a recital, something formidable to start with. The first piece that you heard is Ruth Crawford Seeger's work for flute or oboe, her diaphonic suite number 1. The first time that I encountered this style of music, this genre of music, I was actually quite young. And as oboe players, a huge amount of the repertoire that we have comes from the early to mid to late 20th century. And that is only getting to be more and more common. That music and the expectation that this is the music that students, advanced high school students, undergraduates, through master's work, that this is the music that they encounter earlier and earlier is just becoming a fact. So the entire process of my doctoral capstone project, my dissertation, this lecture recital, has been centered and is focused around that. That is one of the 4 pieces that will be discussed this evening as analogous to Aldo Faldi's 12 studi seriali, 12 serialist, very strict serialist, oboe etudes. So, let's get started. The first piece was, as I mentioned, Ruth Crawford Seeger's diaphonic suite. It can be played on flute or the oboe. The range works exactly the same. There's no changes that have to be made to play this on the oboe versus playing it on the flute. And anecdotally, I think it's been nice to come to a piece like this and reflect backwards on what was, if I may, the gateway drug into this type of repertoire, which for many oboe players is a piece by Benjamin Britten, The 6 Metamorphoses after Ovid. That piece of music is not serialist in any regard, but it is extremely demanding of the student to conceptualize music in a way that most likely up until that point they've never seen before. So as a teacher, I think that it's really important, and this is something that I hope to offer my students, is as many resources as possible to help them contend with, digest, and eventually put their stamp on any piece that they play. I believe that the Faldi oboe etudes, and we're really about to launch into them in a moment here, bridge that gap. And all that is to say that the pieces that I have selected for the purpose of the lecture today and my dissertation aim to connect pieces from Faldi's set of 12 into 4 pieces that are now canonically important as oboe players. Before we do that, though, we have to go backwards. Any oboe players in the audience might chuckle a little bit at what this is. This is from the Oboe Player's Bible. This is from Apollon Marie Rose Barrett's Oboe Method. And every oboe player, worth their weight in anything, worth their weight in reeds, let's say that, has a very well-loved copy of this book. Barrett details everything in the oboe method. He starts with how to read music, cane selection, equipment selection, more ways of playing scales and different articulations that anyone should ever have to do in their life, as well as articulation studies. And then we move to the progressive melodies. And the idea of the progressive melodies is that over the course of 40 of them, different styles are exposed to the oboe player. And the student, by going through all 40 of these melodies, more or less has an understanding of the oboe's role in most situations that Barrett encountered it in. That's the important thing here. This is informed by where Barrett worked, where he lived. He was an oboist in Covent Garden. He was playing the great pop tunes of the day, the ballets, the operas, music that was colloquially available to the concert-going public, and music that his students would have more or less understood how this went. Well, that's a little bit more difficult because I don't think any of us necessarily grow up, under most circumstances, hearing music like the Crawford Seeger. So therefore, when something like this is put in front of us, how do we come to terms with that, right? It's a different use of similar language. So a little bit of Barrett, and then we're going to talk about what Barrett shows us. It's a beautiful melody. This sounds like something that could have come right out of the opera hall, right? This sounds like music that you could whistle this tune easily. I challenge any of you to whistle even the opening or any of the Crawford Seeger that I played. Very different sound worlds that we're inhabiting here. But this is still the foundation. We can't bypass Barrett. Barrett teaches us how to play the oboe. What we have here in this melody is a lot of, and I understand everyone's a little bit further away, so I might play a little bit more to illuminate. But we're dealing with big jumps in the registration, jumps of an octave. We're dealing with the idea of creating arrival without impact on these notes, which on the oboe is something that's very difficult to do, and even more difficult to achieve gracefully. We are playing over, more or less, most of the range of the instrument. The lowest note we have is an F in the first space of the treble clef, going the whole way up to the C, 2 ledger lines above. The oboe's range doesn't extend much more below that, or really much more above that. So even in this opening 8 measures, a lot of oboistic material is contained within it. That's all well and good, and there is a lot of carryover into music like the Crawford Seeger and the other pieces that we'll discuss. But in terms of making this sound like a piece of music, the oboist doesn't have to work quite as hard to do that. It's a very clear antecedent and consequent phrase structure, 4+4. It's harmonically driven. We can hear where the cadences are going to be. We can hear where the resolutions are going to be. But once again, in the Crawford Seeger, that's really not the case. And you might be hard-pressed to even find a moment that you would really like to refer to as a cadence or a resolution of sorts. Barrett's method remains one of the most important pedagogical resources for the oboe. It teaches us how to produce sound, shape phrase, and coordinate breath and articulation. But the musical language in which Barrett operates assumes tonal gravity, melodic expectation, conditions that are often absent in much of the solo repertoire written for our instrument across the 20th and 21st centuries. As the oboe repertoire of the late 20th and 21st centuries expanded, performers were increasingly required to engage with music characterized by non-tonal pitch organization, chromatic saturation, registral discontinuity, rhythmic asymmetry, and gesture-based expression. Barrett did not change. The repertory demands changed. And, for what it's worth, that is actually Barrett. and I utilized an AI agent online to help me, or it created a modernized, sort of like putting half of Barrett into a modern outfit, if you will. It didn't really do much for his hair, and I couldn't get it to remove the reflection entirely, but I thought that it was a fun little addition. So, how do we teach or learn to engage with this new musical language? Traditional etude collections remain essential for establishing foundational technique. I'm not here to get rid of Barrett. I'm not here to get rid of Fairling. I'm not here to get rid of Rose. I'm not here to get rid of Broad. I'm not here to get rid of any of this. This is all supplementary to it. Yet, the musical language in which these works operate reflects tonal priorities of the 19th and early 20th centuries and does not consistently address the structural and stylistic demands of modern repertoire. I realize this far away, it's probably mostly illegible. Don't strain your eyes. But this is taken from my dissertation document where I, through referencing past students, including a past student of Dr. Vigneault's extensive research on the pedagogy of etude books available and what they teach, how they teach it, the delivery of them, and the history of them, I created a table. And there's just a few things that I would like to point out. So, pitch organization, that was something that I mentioned, and the melodic construction. So in our traditional etudes, the Barrett, the Fairling, the Gillet, the Broad, we have long breath lyric melodies emphasizing linear phrasing in a cantabile style. Again, based upon the theme or the thematic material of the piece, occasionally we might get a bolero, occasionally we might get a polonaise, occasionally we might have some sort of flair added into this, if you will. But by and large, most of this repertoire is thinking about linear phrase structure, and in almost all circumstances, these are 4 plus 4, 8 plus 8, rounded binary phrases. Whereas in Faldi's studies, things are a little bit different. We have fragmented, intervallic, and cell-based melodic writing, which emphasizes motivic economy based upon his use of tone rows. In terms of intervallic vocabulary, we have stepwise motion with controlled leaps framed within a mostly tonal context in the traditional etude literature. Whereas in the Faldi studies, wide disjunct intervals are really commonplace, and chromatic saturation requires precise control of the instrument. Not that precise control isn't required to play the traditional etudes, but it's a different way of using our brain. It flexes different muscles. And therefore, it's different neural pathways that we have to build and support. Etudes historically serve as vehicles through which performers acquire the skills demanded by the repertoire of their time. When pedagogy fails to evolve alongside repertoire, performers are trained in techniques misaligned with contemporary musical practice. Although Faldi's 12 Brevi Studi Seriali, their oboe occupy a distinct and largely unexamined position within 20th century oboe pedagogy. Though concise in scope, these studies engage serial and post-tonal techniques within a pedagogical framework designed to cultivate the technical and expressive fluency required of modern solo repertoire. So we've talked enough about Faldi at this point. So I'm going to play one of the etudes out of this set in its entirety. This is the 12th of the series, the 12th and final. And first I'm going to clear the water out of my second octave. As far as I know, no one has come up with an etude yet that teaches you how to avoid getting water in your instrument. language than Barrett was employing. A lot of contrast there. Although Faldi's 12 brevi studi seriali addresses this gap that I've been speaking about. Unlike traditional studies, once again, they cultivate intonation without a tonal or harmonic reference point. Chromatic interval control. So what I mean by this is, none of this music is predictable in a way, especially from the oboe's perspective. It's one thing to go through this and very clearly pick out what the tone rows are and their different permutations. But that's music or musical exercises that are done away from the instrument. What it feels like to play that on the oboe is something else entirely. As much as we can know what's going on the page, actually forcing your fingers and your mind and your tongue and your support and your embouchure and your control of the instrument to agree with what your mind knows, I think we all know that that's something else entirely. Furthermore, registral flexibility. I don't believe that there is a single, actually I know this, there is not a single Faldi etude that does not use the full range of the oboe. From the B flat below middle C, actually going past the high F sharps that are required in the Ruth Crawford Seeger and actually going the whole way up to G sharp in some cases, which is well into the range of the flute and our clarinet colleagues. Phrase shaping in a non-tonal context, structural awareness in monophonic writing. This piece of music with a different title that doesn't say etude definitely has a place on a recital program. You could absolutely walk out and I could play any of the 12 out of the set or a collection of them for a concert, for a recital. The material holds up against its peers that we've already accepted as being standard literature. Faldi studies do not replace this etude cant, rather they extend it by translating essential technical and expressive goals into a musical language that aligns more closely with modern demands. In the absence of harmonic accompaniment, this monophonic post-tonal work must generate coherence through internal relationships rather than external support. Meaning, there's nothing really guiding this aside from the next note, or the intervallic relationship from the note you're playing to the note you're going to. Structural clarity is dependent upon the performer's ability to project phrase shape, registral contrast, and motivic continuity. So I thought a lot about that line. So I have a little bit of an experiment. In that same Faldi etude, and I can go back to it here so that we can see it. Even with really clear attention to detail, there's a lot of performer responsibility in making this sound musically coherent. So I'll just take the opening, for example. And this first time, I will do my absolute utmost to play as even as possible without filling in any sort of blanks in terms of phrasing, but still holding true to the markings and the dynamics and the structure that he puts on the page. It's clean, but it doesn't necessarily sound musical. To me, it sounds a bit sterile. I think the next layer to this is treating this with the same amount of care that we do a piece like the Crawford Seeger. Same notes, same rhythms, I hope, but a definite different feeling in how it feels to play, and also, hopefully, in what it sounds like from an audience perspective. So we have value in comparison with the selected repertoire. For the purpose of my dissertation, I chose 4 pieces, including the Crawford Seeger Diaphonic Suite and I paired that piece, or each of those pieces, with corresponding etudes out of this set. In the most fundamental terms, practice this so that you can do this. Maybe it's not that simple, and I don't mean to sort of make it sound oversimplified, but that was basically my impetus behind this. So we have here all 12 etudes represented. We've spoken about the Crawford, and there's a few specific examples of each of these coming up. But I also chose Heinz Holliger's Solo Sonata, which is a sonata for solo oboe. It's a 4-movement work. Elliott Carter's Figment 6, that was actually written for Heinz Holliger as a gift to him. And our very own Dr. Mahir Satiz's Epigrams, 8 epigrams for solo oboe, which is an absolute bear of a piece. And if he ever gets around to publishing it formally, God bless everyone who buys a copy of it. So, without further ado, let's get into each of the etude pairings. On the screen, we will see on the left a snippet from Faulty Etude number 12 that I have played, as well as the first and fourth movements of the Ruth Crawford Seeger. In each instance, we see contour-driven phrasing with irregular structure. Musical shape emerges through contour and gesture in asymmetrical phrase groupings rather than a tonal resolution. And this, in an interesting sort of pseudo-graphic notation, we notice the uneven measure lengths and line system lengths in the Crawford Seeger here. So she's actually doing everything in her power to make this feel unique and to share that unique language. We have registral discontinuity and legato control. Rapid shifts in tessitura require flexible air support and stable embouchure across wide contour arcs. As well as, it's a bit of a tongue twister, cognitive intervallic accuracy. Non-tonal melodic motion disrupts familiar patterns, requiring deliberate pitch awareness and finger precision. Sure, there could be someone who says, well, what if you just practice it? That's true. But a lot of this repertoire in my own come up as an oboe player, I learned a lot of technique in the context of the repertoire that I was being asked to play. And I recognized that that might not always be the most helpful solution for every student. So I can understand that argument, if you even want to call it an argument. I don't, because I think it's completely valid and it's absolutely true. I could have no students in my lifetime that actually ever need these etudes, and I would be perfectly happy because it means that they understand this music and they can naturally project everything that we're talking about here. But at the same time, wouldn't it be great to have resources available and to sort of show these parallels? So that's what really fueled this journey. Continuing the Crawford Seeger and Faulty pairings, this is easily, in my opinion, I think this is one of the most clear analogs to draw, is from the second Faulty Etude number 2 and the third movement of the Crawford Seeger. So we have continuous motion and endurance. Both works require sustained control through nearly uninterrupted eighth note motion. Stability across wide registral movement. Consistent air support and embouchure control are required to maintain pitch and tone throughout the rapid shifts in register. And non-tonal finger and pitch accuracy. This is a lot of carryover from one of these to the other. That also applies in the same ways it did in the previous slide. Moving on to Heinz Holliger. In preparation of the Heinz Holliger piece, which I'll just play some of the motifs that I've isolated from it, it really made me wonder, he's an oboe player, and why was this the kind of music he was writing? Because it's incredibly awkward. So here we have Faulty Etude 6 and 10 on the right, and motifs from Holliger Movement 2. So one of the benefits of Faulty sticking very, very strictly to a where the row is almost always stated with the exception of in one etude in its entirety to start, and then in its entirety to finish. And almost always, he states the row in its entirety, and then we have different permutations or a character change almost always halfway through, where something drastic changes, but it's still the prime statement of the row. It has just changed. That is the case in number 6. We go through 4 lines of music, and then, note for note, at a completely different tempo, we now have the prime row restated. Holger does something a little bit similar. There's a lot of motivic transformation where if you're playing through this, it is really important to be able to highlight and showcase how this is being transformed from section to section. So, out of the Holger movements, I will showcase the following. And he transforms that and he rotates that over and over again in always a statement of the first motif, and then the second motif, and then the third motif. And he does that throughout the entirety of this movement. Valdi does something similar, and that's a bit small for me, so I'm going to come over here to read it. The opening of number 6, this is our first statement. And then something entirely different, but also very similar. In each of these pairings, we have metric transformation of identical material with changing meter and inversion, which alter gesture and accentuation, while the pitch material remains the same. The registral displacement that we've talked about with that intervallic instability, as well as structural repetition versus performer unpredictability. It's really difficult to we fill in the blanks a lot as performers. We read ahead, but at the same time, there's a little bit of skimming that goes on that we all know about, where we're looking ahead and we're like, oh, that looks the same as something that I've done, or it looks slightly different than something that I've done, and it's easy to miss. It's also very easy to say, oh, well, the last time we played this interval was a major third. Well, actually, this time, it's a minor third. And it's very easy to gloss over that. It takes a lot of very specified focus in order to pull that off. And that's where the Valdi etudes, they start to develop those muscles simultaneous to preparation of this repertoire. We have much the same pairing of the same types of ideas in the slow movement of the Holger Sonata, that's the aria, as well as 2 etudes from Valdi, etudes 5 and 9. And then moving on to Carter's Figment 6. This one has the most extreme dynamic and registral demands. Loud dynamics and frequent use of the upper register, which require sustained air support and stability, as well as wide intervallic slurs and rapid registral shifts. Large ascending and descending leaps which demand precise voicing and instantaneous embouchure adjustment, as well as interval-based intonation in this non-tonal context. Understanding where to place the following note based upon the relationship it has, even if it's spanning multiple octave differences, or at least an octave difference, is a skill in and of itself. So we have the opening of the Carter Figment. And that's just the opening. It continues like that for about another 4 minutes. I won't spend 4 minutes playing the remainder of that. For all of you, you can thank me afterwards. But let's draw a little bit of comparison to the Faldi that we have here. So, Faldi wasn't afraid of the extreme upper register of the instrument. And in a way that oddly is similar to Barrett's approach in the articulation studies, where some people give Barrett a lot of flack because in the very first articulation study, he goes the whole way up to a high E. And a lot of people are like, well, why would you make the very first one go up to a high E? This is for a beginner. Well, to them, I give the same response. This is for a beginner. Get them used to it now. Start them early on their way, and soon high E doesn't become much of a problem, and playing high A flats and A's becomes a little more feasible with a little more regularity. Faldi does much the same thing, and we have Faldi Etude number 1. He's already in the very first one of these etudes, going the whole way up to high F sharp, with a jump of nearly 2 octaves preceding it at a glacial tempo, just incredibly slow. And last but not least, we move into our dear colleague and teacher, Dr. Satiz's piece. This one requires a little bit of effort, a lot of effort, from the perspective of the teacher. Because Dr. Satiz, though this piece was written in 2003 and the Carter was written in 2011, this pushes many more boundaries than what the Carter does. Not just in terms of visually what the oboist is looking at, but also in terms of different techniques that we're required to do in understanding the level of composer input. Dr. Satiz does something very fascinating, and I don't know if you can see it very clearly from back there, but he stipulates in multiple places when to vibrate and when not to vibrate. And actually in later movements as well, he actually stipulates the speed of the vibrato. Slow vibrato, fast vibrato, wide vibrato. He's giving us a lot, essentially a whole other layer of direction in this. I can't actually think that there's never been another piece of music that I have played that I have had that stipulated as an oboist. So, in terms of range and stagnation and development of a note, or development of a phrase based upon one singular note. I believe that the analogs between faulty number 4 and faulty number 11, 2, epigrams 1 and 5, are really beneficial to the student. If I play faulty number 11 with these wonderful big hairpins that he puts into the music, these gradual crescendo and decrescendo, at a very slow quarter note equals 48. So take a big old breath before you start this one. I can incorporate concepts of playing entire notes with no vibrato and then suddenly using vibrato, or altering the speed and depth of the vibrato over the course of it. So this is faulty number 11, just the opening of it, with a vibrato pattern that more or less coincides to something that Dr. Saties writes in his first epigram. As a contrast, now I will play the first epigram. In both examples, we see continuations of the same topics that we've been discussing. Contour-driven phrasing with extended slurs across wide registral spans, which shape musical line independent of a harmonic reference point. Slow tempo control and breath pacing. Sustained phrases at very slow tempi demand careful breath management, both of inhalation and exhalation, as well as embouchure stability, understanding where on the reed we need to be, and predicting that we're going to have to move there very quickly. It's not gradiated as we go up or down a scale. These are sudden jumps that we're making. And vibrato control, as well as expressive shaping without tonal guidance. Musical intensity emerges through contour, register, and dynamic nuance rather than a harmonic direction. Thank you all for coming out this evening. It's been a pleasure. I just want a few thank yous, and I'm going to do my best to not tear up or anything. Say thank you to Allie for coming the whole way over and supporting me through this. Yeah, I'm not going to do well. Where'd it go? Thanks, Dad. You've been at every student recital that I've given. And Dr. V, come here. Not many people can say they've gone to a lecture on serialist oboe music, and maybe that's for the better. But you all made it through and lived to tell the tale. So thank you so much.